it. Quick, by show of hands, who here uses Line? Line, the chat app? Line? Nobody? No way. Okay, so in kind of an effort, wanting to kind of experiment with some things, I know a lot of you guys don't like emails. Emails may be impersonal, emails might be just gets lost in a mess. So I kind of wanted to kind of see if we could actually try having a Fapa Northern California Line chat group. For you guys to kind of relay information to us, so we can pass up to headquarters, have our own kind of local discussions, have kind of more streamlined flow in terms of kind of communication. So that will be covered during our connected section, and moving on into our guest speaker for today, Mr. Steve Yates and Ms. Kelsey Goldberg. So looking at year to date for the chapter, kicked off the year very, very nicely. In January, in January, we kicked off the year on the left with democracy renovation, 民主维新. So they came by with Lily to talk about in recent years, combating fake news has been a very, very big topic of issue. On the right, we have Mr. Carl Templeman of the Stanford Taiwan Democracy Project coming in to talk to us a little bit about the 2018 local election and referendum. This microphone is not very happy. Is that better? Or is there like a line?
We don't have a line.
Okay, so if you guys have missed these events, as far as fake news, the Taiwan government has been, there's a very conscious effort trying to combat that by providing more tools and access to better information. Test. Better. But the main gist of it, though, is still combating fake news on our own. Kind of having that doubt, having that question. Question the argument every single time you run into a headline. Does it look suspicious? Checking the news source. As far as Mr. Templeman's presentation, as far as the local election and referendum, it was a bit of a landslide. Not really much in Taiwan's favor, unfortunately. But as far as the political science goes, unfortunately, it was sort of as long as you are not related to Taiwan, you would probably win out in that, unfortunately, because of the prior election, which was a landslide victory for TPP. Moving forward, in March, Duaki, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, Duaki, the rap artist from Taiwan, came to visit with two of his other artists, BR and Gawi, and we had a joint event with Cafe Philosophique. One of the things that I've been really wanting to do for our chapter is to reach out into our local community with other Taiwanese organizations. So Cafe Philo is a very, very young group, mostly our Stanford students. They like talking about philosophy, and philosophy and politics, they're kind of they're very, very close by, right? So with Duagi coming in, it's a very, very interesting kind of perspective in terms of, so hip hop culture, right? Right? Hip hop is a culture that was rooted from the blues, from jazz, from the blues. It was a music, it was a culture, for the oppressed, like from the oppressed for the oppressed. So that's quite appropriate for us to understand how does this work out. And a little bit of a tangent, I don't know if you guys can see on the bottom. On the left side, there's 最想突破的政治忌讳是什么? So hip hop, the whole point of it is being able to say things that people cannot. So it's a very, very powerful force, hoping to draw in the younger audience. And the right, you can see when he went over to karaoke, wanting to kind of push forward with Taiyu Wenhua. So wanting to push forward with more entertainment-based use of the Taiwanese dialect. But then in April, we were very lucky to have our, still currently local, but not for long, Fapa Vice President John Lee, to host our Advocacy Workshop 101 in preparation for our Advocacy Workshop coming in September. Unfortunately, you can tell by the audience, it was a little bit lacking. So some fine-tuning still required, and we'll be working on that. Our Advocacy Workshop coming up in September. I'm hoping before that we'll have at least one, maybe two more workshops to get people prepared. One of the things I'm really, really proud of is this one. So in June earlier this year, last month, we were actually really lucky to join hands with Taiwanese Americans for Equality. It's a brand new nonprofit here in the Bay Area, pushing forward equality for marriage. And as you guys know, Taiwan earlier this year also passed their law. So we were very, very lucky to join in on the parade this year at SF Pride. The Taiwanese, actually this is our first year to have representation at the Pride Parade. And we've had, I think, probably around 400 people strong in our parade, which is really, really amazing. And even better, right after the parade, we actually headed over, since we were in downtown, we headed over to Assemblymember David Chu and Rob Bontes' office to say hello. And Mr. Chu actually was very impressed with our turnout, just saying like, wow, this is the first. And he actually asked us to stay in touch and basically look towards next year, if there's some more of a collaborative opportunity between the Chu office and us. Daniel?
Hey Phil, do you want to talk about last year with David Ting, or Phil Ting?
Yes, so last year, Daniel and I, so Daniel is our previous chapter president. We actually also joined Pride Parade, not with the Taiwan group, but we went to Pride, and afterwards we actually got invited to Phil Ting's office. I don't know if that's familiar, also assembly member. It was, shall I say, less than welcoming. We gave them our business cards and said we were from Fapa, what we represent, and he basically just said, well, unfortunately, what was his exact words, remember? It was something along the lines that, well, it's great that you guys are here, but, I can't really help you.
One very important point from Phil Ting, he asked about the Taiwan Travel Act, which we were pushing in 2018, and he said it is illegal for Taiwanese politicians to come to America. It's in violation of our One China policy, and which I completely disagree with. It seems like if Mr. Ting is an assembly member right now, it doesn't touch foreign policy, but if he becomes more involved in, I don't know, the higher levels of office, then this might be an issue. We have to confront. And he currently represents, I believe, the western half of San Francisco downtown.
Okay. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rob Bonta, actually, but he was actually very, very impressive. I believe he's a Filipino man, but he was actually responsible for the Assembly Bill 1726. It's actually known as the Data Desegregation Act, which basically allowed, is calling forth basically desegregating data rather than like lumping data Asian, now calling forth basically some Pacific Islander groups, which includes Taiwan, mainly for education and for healthcare. So also a very strong ally for Taiwan. Upcoming events. As I mentioned, I do want to have more advocacy workshops, getting members prepared to go into our national conference. I'm going to not use this. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's silly. Yes, much better. I like this. This is more, yeah. Okay, so advocacy workshop. First things first, how many of you guys have been to the conference in DC in September? Show of hands, please. Not that many, right? Ultimate purpose of FAPA is for us to, we're advocates, right? We go to DC, we speak to members of Congress, we get them to support bills that support Taiwan. That's our ultimate goal, right? Food and all is great, but what sets us apart is that we're active, we do things. So, but me myself even, I'm not that great at it, but I'm still learning. And I want to have more workshops to make sure that more of us can get more educated of how to advocate for Taiwan, and then basically bring us more members to go to DC together. Conference is 9/14 to 9/16 September. Please mark your calendars. Later on, there'll be another slide to get a little bit more detail. In late September, director Fu Yu, award winner for Best Documentary Film of the Golden Horse Awards earlier this year. She'll be coming to visit end of September, showing off her documentary, which won the award, Our Youth in Taiwan. It is actually a documentary talking about the Sunflower Movement, showcasing mainly Tsung Wei-ting. A not Papa event coming up very quickly. In a few weeks, New Power Party, Freddie Lim and Huang Jie, Si Yiren, city councilwoman, are coming to the Bay Area as well. I'll be posting them personally. There'll also be flyers at the front door for you to hang on to. That's in a few weeks. So I like QR codes a lot. So if you guys have your phones, you should be just pull up your camera and just scan that. It'll take you to the website for more information as well as registration. So as I mentioned, the whole purpose of Fapa, what makes us different from any other organization is that we do advocacy. We go to DC, we get into the faces of members of Congress, and we try to make things happen. That's the difference, that's the power of Fapa, and we need your help. So there's that. These QR codes will be available later on as well. Going to the conference as well is a very, very good opportunity for you guys to meet our headquarters staff. Very good looking people. Had Mr. Mike Kuo, our president, John Lee, right over there, our vice president, young handsome guy, Kazette D. Wu, and our new staff, Ziyun Huang. A little bit of updates about what headquarters is up to. So we talked about our chapter activities. Headquarters recently they're pushing forward these top 4 bills. The Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act basically calls for the U.S. Congress, certain departments to keep an eye on, like the PRC's treatment for the Uyghurs. And you know that currently there's more than 1 million in excess currently in concentration camps. It's really tough for them right now. We want to keep an eye on them. Number 2, S480, countering PRC influence operations. Have you guys heard of the Confucius Institute? It's a very, very scary thing. Confucius Institute, it sounds really glorious, right? Confucius sounds nice, but it's not. It's actually it's actually a direct arm of the People's Liberation Army in China. It's military propaganda being spread all the way down to our elementary school kids here on U.S. soil. That's terrifying. So S480's purpose is to counter that, basically keeping an eye on these organizations, seeing what they're doing, calling for transparency and accountability. Number 3, of course, it's in bold. That's actually our main focus, the Taiwan Assurance Act. Taiwan Assurance Act, and I quote, asks the United States to reinforce its commitments to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act in a manner consistent with the 6 assurances as both government works to improve bilateral relations. Also in the Assurance Act, there's also language in terms of military and trade as well. The one that's currently still being worked on, we have a act that's in progress that's sanctioning the PRC's activity in the East and South China Sea. Of course, there's a lot of dispute in terms of the islands in that region and general territorial lines that they don't quite abide by. 2 other ones that are they're in the works. I don't want to say that they're on the back burner because they're not, but other items of interest, of course, are regaining Taiwan's status as observer and the World Health Organization, as well as the latest, the newest, is our support for the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, given what's happening in Hong Kong right now. And speaking of which, on the back of the room, hopefully before I end of today, I'm putting together a Lennon wall, basically little post-it notes showing little phrases of support for Hong Kong. So please head over there, write a little note of support, and hopefully we can have a group photo at the end, and I'll send that over to Hong Kong, to the supporters. A lot of the Hong Kong organizations actually are based here in the Bay Area. Many of them have flown to Hong Kong, to kind of help organize and support the very difficult times over there. So I think, for us, it's a big part that we should support as well. You'll notice from this list, there's a lot of things that aren't directly related to Taiwan, and that's actually intentional. In the last year, FAPA headquarters, one of the things that we're trying to do is to do more outreach, reaching out to other organizations that share a common, for lack of a better word, enemy. It's not the time right now to say who's different from who. It's the time to say, hey, you know what, let's work together, more togetherness. Talking about Line earlier, as far as the communication, here's a QR code to add a Line group for FAPA Northern California. I'm hoping this to be a nice communication channel for us to kind of keep updated, for me to push content for you guys, from news articles. And actually, hell, if you have articles that you guys have questioned, hey, is this true? Is this real news? Is this fake news? Send it into the group. We'll find out for you guys. Events will be posted here as well. And again, these QR codes will be available after the presentation. Final thoughts. Again, I know I went through this very, very quickly. Again, I don't think I am the star today, but a bit updates for the oh, yes. Again, I don't, final thoughts. As I mentioned, the purpose of Fapa is advocacy. You do realize that all that we're doing here means nothing if you don't go back to Taiwan and vote, right? We are currently facing an election that is kind of difficult. I know that a lot of people in this audience probably are very upset with the current selection of candidates, but there's not that much time left. There's 200 days. There's not that much time left for us to really kind of try to change things right now. I mean, we have what we have, and that's kind of like, it's the double-edged sword of democracy, right? You know, people vote, and we respect that. And together we move forward. You know, if we choose to separate, we fall apart. So I do urge people to go back to Taiwan, you know, come this winter, and make that vote, because if we don't, you know, the other side will. Yeah. And thank you for your time. Again, here are the two QR codes from the presentation. On the left, it's for the line chat for Fapa, our Macau chapter. On the right, information for our advocacy conference coming up. Thank you for your time. Pass the mic over to John, who will distinguish. Oh, right, yes. So as far as Q&A is concerned, again, in efforts to save time, we'll be passing out note paper here, pen and paper. Please write down your questions for myself or for Steve and Kelsey, and we'll address them at the very end. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. Did you all have enough to eat? Jababo. All right, well, fantastic. I would like to thank Yame and Ruby. I know Ruby couldn't join us from NATWA, who helped order all this wonderful, wonderful food. It's delicious. Definitely a step up from normally what we get, so hopefully you guys have recognized that. Better than the... And Grace, yes, we mentioned for the dessert, and Mr. The Tongchang Hui Huizang for the ducks. So thank you so much for all that wonderful sustenance. So we're going to get on to the main event now. We have a couple of distinguished people to speak to us today. First and foremost is Steve Yates, a longtime friend of Taiwan, of Fapa in general. He has a very, very, very experienced and deep career around foreign relations, around China, around Taiwan. He has his master's degree in China studies from Johns Hopkins, I believe. Started off as an analyst at the NSA, and then also was a senior analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Since then, though, he's also had a professional career at the White House from 2001 to 2005 as the Deputy Assistant to the Vice President. Is also serving as a professor of practice at Boise State University, and most recently has been consulting with Fapa. So we thought he would have a lot of great perspectives to share on all of the recent events that have been surrounding Taiwan, with, as you can see, with Hong Kong, with the arms sales, with all the communications, the passing of the Taiwan Travel Act, that is probably one of the most exciting times we've seen in the past probably 3 decades, but you guys would know better than me on that point. We also have Kelsey Coburn, who's here, an associate of Steve, and she has a lot of great insights on how to think about some more grassroots advocacy, community relationship building, that she'll also share her experiences. So without further ado, I'd like to have Steve come up and talk.
Is this working?
Yeah, looking.
I don't know if this is better or if I just yell. Excuse me. Well, thank you very, very much for welcoming me and my colleague Kelsey to come and visit today. Thank you for the glorious food. There's one thing that is a blessing and a curse when doing anything that has to do with Taiwan, is that the love language of Taiwan is food. And there's so much love in this room, and there's so much food in my belly. And it just makes it somewhat difficult to try to stay healthy. But I do appreciate the love and care and support that the Taiwanese American community has given to me over the years. And I also just want to do everything that I can to share a few experiences that I've had that hopefully can help us be better at doing what we really believe in and trying to persuade more Americans to see being pro-Taiwan as a pro-American position. As all of you know, that for decades there's been a lot of hard work done on advocating on Taiwan issues. A lot of different Taiwanese organizations exist in the US. You know them better than I do, but from the moment I first started dealing with people in the Taiwanese community, it seemed like if there were 3 different Taiwanese people, there were 5 different arguments going on. And so there's always more organizations and more competition and more leaders of everything. And in some ways, the challenge is how do we organize and focus and do things in a way that make it very accessible for the rest of America to feel like this is something that I believe in, this is something that I want to be a part of, this is something that I can do something about. So today, I hope that some of the things that I share and that Kelsey shares will give you some ideas about things we might do differently. Now, some of you might be doing some of these things already, and all we can say is thank you and congratulations for doing such good things already. But I think it's useful from time to time to have a little bit of a brainstorm and to think about how other people might consider some ideas or initiatives that can broader knowledge of Taiwan and so get more people helping to press our leaders to do the right thing when it comes to their dealings with China and Taiwan. Of course, a lot has changed recently. We would have had a fundamentally different conversation 6 months ago because we had a primary process in Taiwan that was coming. It hadn't arrived yet. There was murmurs in Hong Kong, but not the full-blown demonstrations that I have to say are quite shocking to me, not in a bad way. In some ways it's very inspiring, but at the same time, it's very, very scary that it's this necessary. That the reality of the Communist Party of China is just beginning to dawn on people. Some of us have seen the ugly side of the Communist Party of China for a long time. And it's really taken, I think, tragically too long for a lot of the rest of the world to have some sense of a kind of a sudden enlightenment that this is really one of the most evil, destructive, and malicious forces ever known to mankind. No group has ever killed more people than the Communist Party of China has. And almost all of them were Chinese people. And it's just disgusting that the Chinese people have to continue to suffer under this. But what's worse is that because of mistakes that our government and many other governments have made, some of which I participated in, I'm not a perfect person, that advocating policies towards dealing with China, we enabled this threat to go from being able to tragically persecute the Chinese people to being a perverse influence in the international system, and now attacking the institutions of freedom and democracy in other countries. Taiwan is at the forefront of these kinds of influence operations that was talked about. Very important topic. Taiwan, per capita, is the most cyber-attacked place on the planet. So if we want to study in the United States how to handle cyber attacks, maybe we should invest a great deal in studying how Taiwan is attacked. Because as delicate a situation as Taiwan finds itself in, it's still there. And that means that they've been doing some things right, and maybe there's some best practices we should share. Well, in the United States, we spent a couple of years talking about the Russians. And I'm not here to debate whether the Russians are good or bad. Vladimir Putin, not a good man. But the kind of things that our country was talking about for the last 2 years are peanuts compared to what the Communist Party of China does. Not just against Taiwan, in the United States, and they've been doing it for decades. And so it's now time that people have become somewhat aware that there's a problem. There's been a movement against the Confucius Institutes. One of the greatest ironies in my entire career is to find out that the Communist Party of China, that had a massive anti-Confucius campaign, where they were destroying all historical places and documents having to do with Confucius, now uses Confucius Institutes to try to manipulate foreigners. It's just a strange twist of fate. But these now have become better known. We have United States senators, members of the House of Representatives that have been supporting bills that are starting to pass and get implemented to try to educate our states and our localities and our universities how they can begin to turn this tide. But we're starting late. So in recent years, we've made some progress. In this year, there's a much more awareness of the real threat that the Communist Party of China presents. I think, in a very strange way, the Communist Party of China has endorsed President Tsai Ing-wen's re-election. I don't think they meant to do that, and I don't think that they even are aware of what they're doing in that regard. But Xi Jinping did not have to be such a belligerent jerk in his New Year's Eve speech, but he was. And that gave President Tsai a chance to respond. And her response was pretty good. Now, they didn't have to build concentration camps for Uyghurs. They had been slow cooking that frog for decades. They had been moving Han people in to dilute the ethnicity. They had been destroying an awareness of religion, an awareness of local dialects, and they have been completely changing the politics of Xinjiang the way they've been trying to do the same in Tibet, Xizang. But that had mostly been working. But for some reason, the Communist Party of China seems to know it's more vulnerable than we think it is. And so it decided slow wasn't good enough. And now we have the largest scale re-education through hard labor, in some cases extermination, going on inside of China. And up until very recently, almost no one in the world knew or cared. And even now, the news has been flowing about Xinjiang for months. The Washington Post, which any of you who know my background, you know that I'm not a fan of the politics of the Washington Post. But the Washington Post has every single month of 2019 had a lead editorial talking about the Uyghurs and the Chinese persecution of the Uyghurs, and how if the words never again are going to ever have meaning, then something needs to be done about the Uyghurs. And it's very difficult for us to figure out what is going to be done. So we're at the point of where awareness is peaking, but the prescription of what to do, we still have some work to do. So as Fapa members, I'm very excited about the opportunity that all members have to try to find ways to converse and engage people who are not Taiwanese, people who maybe have never come to a Fapa meeting, people who maybe haven't had this glorious buffet of food. But they need to feel some of your love. And you can share some of that on some of these broader issues, hopefully to get more people involved into pro-Taiwan advocacy. I've been involved in politics for a lot of my life, some of it just as an advisor, a policy person. Some of it was actually working hard to try to do things to get people elected, worked to try to get myself elected a time or two. And in doing that, there's some hard lessons that you get in politics that need to inform what we do as Fapa to try to change American policy for the better. Politics is a game of numbers. It doesn't matter how likable or unlikable you are. If you don't get the right number of votes, you're still not in office. Or if you have a good person that you like that is advocating your issue, and yet you don't get the requisite number of votes and the resolution or law doesn't pass, you still lost. And we still have work to do. And so we need numbers. And as wonderful as the Taiwanese American community is, the numbers are not big enough to make state legislatures and the United States Congress every single time have to listen to what does the Taiwanese American community think about this. And we're going to have to move our policy in that direction. Think of how a lot of Americans have dealt with the issue of Middle East peace or support for the State of Israel. Who do you think the largest organized group of supporters for the State of Israel are in the United States? Just randomly. Who do you think? What? Jewish? Anyone have any other ideas? It's evangelical Christians. Why is that? Because they care about the Holy Land, and guess what? Their numbers are larger than the Jewish community in the United States. And so the Jewish community and the evangelical Christian community can find common cause in an interest, and by multiplying numbers, they can actually have a much bigger impact on American policy toward a homeland than if they just stood alone in their own community, righteous, convincing about what they cared about, but by having more people who were not of their community be a part of that broader cause, has more power, more influence, and you get the votes, things pass, candidates win, and that's what we need to begin to try to do. FAPA's been around for decades. I honor the commitment, sacrifice that many people in this room have made, many people who are no longer with us made to get to where we are today. But if we're going to give meaning to the sacrifice of the people who lived through martial law, who were blacklisted, who've witnessed the tremendous change in Taiwan, if we're going to honor the legacy of the sacrifices that were made to get to where things are in Taiwan today, and to get to where U.S. policy towards Taiwan is today, we've got to do more. And we're going to need more people to help us. So, how to think about some of these things? Well, some of you know that I first got to know things in Taiwan when I was a missionary. And being a missionary is an interesting learning experience. Number one, there's some things that have to do with language. That's fun. You get taken as some curly haired, you wouldn't believe it, but I had very bushy curly hair at that time. And got dropped off into rural Taiwan in the south. So there's skinny white, curly haired, big glasses guy walking up to random doors and saying, "Hey, would you like to talk about religion?" Those people, no. Sometimes it would be a little kid that would answer the door. He'd look up and go, "Monkey, monkey." I don't know why, but Taiwanese people said I looked like a monkey. And an adorable little kid would turn around and he'd say, "Oh, Dad, there's Big Nose at the door." And then he'd come back and he'd say, "Daddy says no one's home." That's a little taste of missionary life. But what it did is it allowed me to go to places that are way beyond a classroom, way beyond a book, way beyond a newspaper, to meet with real people in their homes, to listen to their family stories, to listen to their struggles, to listen to their happiness and sometimes some of the tragedies. I was trying to spread Christianity to a lot of people who were not Christian. But I was also there to listen and to learn. And it was a tremendous experience. I would submit to you that while this is not a religious calling, but I think we, as advocates for a strong American policy in support of the security, human rights, dignity of the people of Taiwan, we need to be more missionary-like. Do you think that I wanted to wake up every day and go talk to strangers? It wasn't what I was raised to do. I felt awkward trying to do that. Sometimes I felt embarrassed. Sometimes I felt like my language wasn't good enough. Does that sound familiar? But you know what? There were people who were not nice. Daddy said no one's home. It was cute, but not really that nice. Then there was people who were super nice, who would open up their home and say, "You know, I don't really want to talk about religion, but I'll feed you guys a meal, and we'll talk a little bit, and we can be friends." And that was a good deal. And that's how I became someone who was interested in what was happening in Taiwan. I didn't sit down and say I want a history lecture. I wanted to know about real people and real experience. And if you can do that with your neighbors and your friends, people who don't come to these meetings, we might be able to get more people connected through their belly, in their heart, and in their mind, and then take action to try to influence the people we elect to represent us and make decisions. So, there are some simple things, they sound simple anyway, that that any organization can do to advocate for a candidate, for an issue, what have you. And as FAPA members, we're a part of an issue advocacy organization in the sense that we're a 501c3 organization where we advocate policy. And the tools that we use to do that in many ways can be similar to the tools that lots of people use in politics. So before going too much further, I want to invite my colleague Kelsey to come forward. Kelsey, as was mentioned, she was, well, I don't think it was mentioned that she has a degree in communications from Northwest Nazarene University. She worked in the Idaho Republican Party headquarters office on communications when I was chairman. And she was also the manager of my campaign when we ran for lieutenant governor in Idaho. But Kelsey has some, she's also been to Taiwan 3 times in the last year. So now she's a full-fledged expert in Taiwan. And she's going to share with you some thoughts, impressions about what people know about Taiwan who, unlike me, weren't dropped into the countryside to talk to people's houses. But also talk about some of these tools. So Kelsey, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to echo Steve's thanks in giving us both the opportunity to speak a little bit today. As he mentioned, my background is in politics, working for the Republican Party, so it had nothing to do with Taiwan, with Asia, or literally anything related to Taiwan. So if you'd asked me 2 years ago what I knew about issues related to Taiwan, its sovereignty, U.S. and Taiwan relations, it would have been next to nothing. And most Americans are in that same boat. So since then, I've had the opportunity to go to Taiwan now 3 times. I've gotten to engage with FAPA chapters around the country, and I've had the experience that most Americans have when they interact with the Taiwanese community, which is that you all are warm and hospitable and friendly, and it just makes it so easy to be an advocate for Taiwan. But most people have no idea anything having to do with Taiwan. So a couple weeks ago, I was home talking to my dad, and first of all, more often than not, he talks about Thailand instead of Taiwan. So that's the first hump we have to get over, is realizing they're separate countries. But he said, he was talking and said something about the United States ambassador to Taiwan. He said, well, Dad, we technically don't have an ambassador. I was like, well, why not? Like, okay, first of all, good question. That's a whole other thing. It's like, we don't have official formal diplomatic relations. And you're just like, oh, that makes no sense. Maybe Trump will change that. And well, that's probably not going to happen in the next year. That's an example of what most of your average American thinks when they hear the situation, the relations between the United States and Taiwan, and the One China policy and all of these other issues. Is it's, oh yeah, we should support Taiwan. They're a democratic country. We're a democratic country. Why don't we support them more? But it comes down to an issue of not enough people understanding. So in Washington, D.C., as Steve was mentioning, there's one group of people that elected officials listen to more than anyone else, and that's their constituents. We are a very small group of constituents. We need to get more people involved and more people to engage on behalf of Taiwan in order to build up that support and to get elected officials to actually take action. So there are a few small things that I think most chapters can do in order to engage their community. So the first one is when you're thinking about broader community engagement. The San Francisco Bay Area, where we're at, has a large business community. You've got leaders in technology, in literally every industry. There's probably a very large, or multiple, chambers of commerce in the area. It would be worth inviting, the president of the Chamber of Commerce to come and speak to your FAPA chapter about ways that you can engage with the business community. Then that person, who is an influencer in their own community, has engaged with you. You'll probably feed them. They'll probably enjoy the food. And then they can go out and talk to their friends. So it's just building relationships with these individual business and political and community leaders that have their own circle of influence, and maybe who have a unique influence on elected officials that we don't already have. Something else I think that's important is youth engagement. And there are a few ways that you can do this. I think one of the most beneficial things that people can do, that the Taiwanese American community can do, is to help to find ways to assist young people who are attempting to learn another language. People are always saying that it's important to learn Mandarin, Spanish, whatever. But if you find ways to go into schools and be a conversation partner, or go into another organization and be a conversation partner and help teach people Mandarin or even Taiwanese, that's another way to build a relationship while also giving them a tangible skill. And something else that other Fapa chapters have been really interested in or starting to do is putting together a scholarship fund for students who are going, who are in or going to college next year. So say you set aside $500 for a scholarship fund. And in order to get this scholarship, a student has to write an essay on ways that their future may interact with Taiwan, whether through business, politics, or international affairs. And you send that out to local high schools, and 20 people apply. You still only have to give that scholarship to one student, but now 20 people have done their research, applied for the scholarship, and learned more about Taiwan than they would have otherwise. And kind of the final area of engagement that I think is really important for the community is engaging with the media. So especially recently in the last couple of years, there's been more written on Taiwan than I think ever in my life, for sure ever in the last few years. Because there's, Trump is doing things on Taiwan, there's stuff happening in Congress, things happening in Hong Kong and in China in general, so reporters are starting to pay a little bit more attention. But a lot of times they don't have the time or the depth of knowledge to go back and understand all the nuances of the relationship between the United States and Taiwan. So as a Fapa chapter, it's worth finding people who are able to, when a story comes out from a local reporter talking about Taiwan issues, we're able to read that and just send them an email and say, hey, I'm a Taiwanese American. I think this story was great, or I think this story maybe could have changed it a little bit here. And if you ever have any questions in the future, feel free to reach out. I'd love to be a background resource for you. And that's just another way that you're able to build relationships with people. So in the end, it comes down to building one-on-one relationships. That's how I came to support Taiwan. That's how I was able to get involved. That's how my father, because of his relationship with me, now knows about Taiwan. Other people who I'm friends with who have never met a Taiwanese person, because I'm from Idaho and there aren't very many Taiwanese people in Idaho. But I have friends in Idaho, and because I've now talked to them, they have a different understanding and are able to be more supportive of Taiwan. So, welcome any questions on any other ideas that you guys may have, things you may be doing. Would love to hear about ways that you're engaging, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Kelsey. Well, hopefully that gave you some specific ideas to consider. Now, as with any idea, you're going to be able to take some of it. Maybe you can adapt it to local conditions. Maybe there's things that you could copy or expand or do even better than we could think of. But I thought it was very, very important for you at least to hear a few specific things that can be tried in order to have more of a community engagement talk about not just Taiwan, a faraway place, but here's this issue that matters to people that are right here in my neighborhood, in my community, in my office, what have you. And what we're talking about is literally in the headlines. With the demonstrations that are going on in Hong Kong, I just don't see with them coming out so much now for so many weeks that headline is going away tomorrow. This is something that's going to last for a bit. There's, as Kelsey mentioned, there's already a fairly sustained amount of coverage of the Taiwan election. And that's, it comes and goes over the years. In 1996, there was a lot of coverage because it was the first direct election of the president. 2000, it was covered a lot because it was a divided field, and the who'da thunk it happened, and the DPP nominee ended up winning not a majority of the votes, but won the presidency, and off we were to a whole different kind of thought about Taiwan. In 2008, there was a lot of coverage because all of a sudden there was a sea change, and the KMT came back Ma Ying-jeou was coming in, the KMT controlled the legislature, and off we were going, and people wondered, what's the future of Taiwan? What's the future of the American relationship with Taiwan if the people of Taiwan have chosen basically to make a deal with China? And then we thought at that time, I had many, many Taiwanese friends who were very, very depressed. They felt like all was lost. The legislature was lost, the presidency was lost. Felt like it was the end of Taiwan as we know it. And then, of course, the complete opposite happened 8 years later in 2016. Politics is crazy. It's like a yo-yo. There's ups, there's downs. But I think the most important thing for all of us, and some of you in this room may have had some very strong emotions invested in the primary. Believe me, I've been through primaries myself, and when you're on the losing side of a primary, you don't feel happy. But politics is not life. And the things that we care about in trying to advocate for the freedom, democracy, dignity, sovereignty for Taiwan, those are bigger than politics, and they're bigger than us as individuals. I was extremely blessed in my career to watch the arc of President Lee Teng-hui's rise as a leader of Taiwan. To this day, I mean no disrespect to others who are in politics and leadership, I think he's the best leader Taiwan has ever had, and he's the best leader Taiwan will ever have. He's an extraordinary, historic person. His life represents an incredible journey that most of us cannot even fathom. Being raised in a colonial period, speaking Japanese better than he does Mandarin. I can't judge his Taiwanese, but his English is choppy. But he went through that experience. An agricultural economist. No one in their right mind would predict that an agricultural economist would become a charismatic leader that would transform his country. But he did. When Jiang Jingguo died, the people I was talking to said, this is going to be a temporary leader. There's much more powerful people, don't worry about this Lee Teng-hui guy. His temporary leadership lasted 12 years. And Taiwan went from no national elected leaders with a provincial assembly with a bunch of jokes from the mainland, pretending like they were still governing the mainland from the middle of Taiwan, to a frozen provincial government. It's so frozen, I bet no youth in Taiwan even knew there was one. And to direct elections for the legislature, direct elections for president, change of party control. DPP currently has the majority in the legislature. Most of my career, people thought that was impossible. So things will come and go in politics, but the things we stand for are bigger than that. And President Lee saw all of this change, as all of us did, kind of watching. Some of you actively pushing for, and some of your families maybe even sacrificing and suffering along the way. So you know the price. After I had the honor of serving in the White House, I had an opportunity to go back to Taiwan many, many times. And I had the chance to talk with President Lee at length. Some of you might think that I talk for a long time. It's true. President Lee talks longer. Sat down with him, and 4 hours later, I was leaving. 3 times. And everyone was like a tremendous gift of a living history lesson talking to me about his personal experience, political experience, governance experience. Joked about my name. He says he's Taiwan de Ahui, Zhimeiguo de Ahui. I'll take it. I'll take it. It's not true, but it's okay. I'll take it. It's good. But he ended with something that I try to share with every audience because it moved me tremendously, and I think it helps us focus on what matters now, the mission that we should have. He said, I don't know what day I'm going to put my head down on the pillow and I'm not going to come back up. But every day that I have left, I'm going to do everything I can to try to help the Taiwanese people know who they are, be proud of who they are, and to help their children be the masters of their own futures. I think that's something that most Americans can identify with. It moves the head, it moves the heart, hopefully it moves people. It's also people who fought on different sides of a primary can hopefully come back to. Because when you come to a general election, you don't get the choice of all the other people who might have been on the ballot. They're not there. It's going to be someone whose name that is on the ballot that will be the next president, whether it's in the United States or in Taiwan. My personal preference is that people think about the work and the actions that these people will take. There's too much personality stuff in politics. Fine if you like the personalities, fine if they make you angry or happy, but focus on what they do, what can get done. And we need people to engage, to share that vision and that mission that President Lee was saying. I hope that when it comes near the end of my days, that everyone will know that I did that for the people I love and care about in America, but also the people that I love and care about in Taiwan. That we all do what we can to know who we are, be proud of who we are, and make sure that our children can be the masters of their own destiny. So in that, I think we've got a mission. So Kelsey talked about some specific things we can try. I'd like to just have questions and answers. We can continue to talk about things that are happening in U.S.-Taiwan politics, or policy, I should say. I'm not talking about politics in Taiwan. Talking about what's happening in U.S.-Taiwan policy. A couple of things that Fapa has made a priority to advocate for. One is the name of the representative office in D.C. Some of you may know the name is the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office. I'll put it diplomatically, I think that's stupid. Because there's a lot in Taiwan that's not in Taipei. And I don't understand why, if the United States has an American Institute in Taiwan, not an American Institute in Taipei, why Taiwan has an Economic and Cultural Representative Office. The T stands for Taipei. That doesn't make any sense to me. So, while this is completely a decision of the Taiwan government, it would be helpful if we put pressure on our elected officials to send a clear signal that it would be welcome for the people of Taiwan and their government to name their representative office, a tricky name like representative office, and for the T to stand for Taiwan, because it's Taiwan's representative office. I think that would be appropriate. But whatever the name is, using the name Taiwan I think is quite important. And I hope that you can be a part of that activism, whether it's through emails, social medias, going to groups and encouraging them to acknowledge and talk about this would be extremely helpful. There are a number of other priorities that have been mentioned. The Taiwan Assurance Act is really, really useful. We are somewhat blessed and cursed right now in Congress. Things with China are so bad that so many people want to say so many negative things about China. That's okay, but they also want to do a lot of positive things for Taiwan, which is also okay. The bad part of it is, it's like a bunch of cats going in different directions. And so there's a lot of really good people with good ideas going in different directions, and there's a bunch of bills. Some that came up and passed last year, and President Trump has signed every one of these that have passed without any caveat, no question, just signed. And so there's an open opportunity for these things to pass, but we need to try to help our elected officials establish sort of some strategy and priorities, what have you. The Taiwan Assurance Act is one of those things that helps kind of pull some of these extra pieces together into one bill to try to have a good statement of policy for Taiwan. And so FAPA members joining others in our communities and states to try to push for that to make it to the president's desk and signature is very, very important. There are a number of other things that are very, very important that we do going forward on this. We're at an historic time in terms of the Taiwan Travel Act having passed. And while I congratulate President Tsai on making the most of her visits through New York and Denver, I have to say that I'm extremely disappointed that they are still called transits, and that the State Department still limited some of the things that the democratically elected president of Taiwan is able to do when coming to the United States. And so we need to also encourage our friends in Congress who overwhelmingly supported the Taiwan Travel Act to ask some pointed questions of State Department witnesses about, after we pass this by a bipartisan supermajority and it gets signed by the president into law, who are these people in your administration that said that a speech at a university should be a closed event? That sounds like a China event, not a Taiwan event. And the US government shouldn't be in the business of restricting things like that. Taiwan has many important trade partners in the United States. The elected leaders of Taiwan should be allowed to freely go and thank those trade partners for helping stimulate the economy of Taiwan and having important exchanges. So we have done a lot. We have a great opportunity, but we have much work to do. So hopefully we've given you some thoughts and ideas about how we can do that together. So with that, let's do some questions and answers with the time that remains. And if you have any hard questions, we'll give the mic to Kelsey.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve and Kelsey. Take a quick breather. Connie, if you could please help collect the questionnaires. Questionnaires, please wave them up. Please collect them. And quick little segue, give them a little bit of a breather.
Do you want me to collect?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Can we just ask it? I wrote it down, but I think it's so many. Can we just,
Yeah, I mean, you're.
we can ask?
Let's just collect them first. Yeah.
And then you can come.
And a little bit of a little intermission right now. Many of you know I actually work personally in the animal welfare field in Taiwan. So I rescue Taiwan dogs. And so I brought actually these myself as a little gifts for everyone to carry today. Little stickers, basically promoting our Taiwanese dogs. So these are for everybody. And also as a little token of appreciation for our two speakers. I actually have two little enamel pins of our Taiwan Ogao for Steve and Kelsey. Kind of what I was saying earlier a little bit. In the rescue world, my work is bringing these young stray dogs, and many of them are handicapped. We bring them off the streets in Taiwan, we clean them up, we find them homes here in the States. Many people say that it's a great thing to do. I'm doing it, yes. But to be honest with you, as much as I love these dogs, I hope for the day to not have to do this work again. Because the fact that these dogs fly halfway across the world to find a home signals a problem in Taiwan for animal welfare. So that's what I'm working on right now. And likewise, as much as I love Taiwan, and as much as I love Fapa, I also hope for the day for us to no longer have to do this anymore when our problems are solved. And there's only one way to get to that is being more active, getting up and doing something. Okay. So right now, with the Q&A, we have the notes. So I'm gonna start with this first. And if anything that was missed or further discussions can arise, we'll move that into going forward. Okay, so for first question from Whelan. Does the USA have an intention to organize Pacific Union as like NATO in Europe?
Well, the NATO alliance is unique. I don't think it's going to be replicated exactly in Asia. But obviously the United States does have a series of alliances in Asia. Treaty allies of Japan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand, and we have
India.
Well, India is not a treaty ally, but and Indians are quite proud of their history in the non-aligned movement. But they clearly now, especially in the circumstances we talked about earlier, they have concerns about China. Every once in a while when people talk about, well, we have to have an accommodating position towards China because of the population, you sort of just imagine 1 billion plus Indian hands raising, wait a minute, we have a lot of people too. But they also, India has some people in the current government that are advocates for a closer partnership with Taiwan. And part of that is because India is a country that has had to fight real enemies and has had tragic attacks that have occurred on its own soil. It knows what border security means because it has border problems with China. And so there are clear partnerships that we can have. And the current administration talks about an Indo-Pacific strategy. And so it's not NATO necessarily, but there is a concerted effort to try to think of Asia as more than just East Asia, which then allows China to be the big dog on the block. And instead also cover parts of South Asia, making India an integral part of strategy and participation in economic development, advocacy of values, but also in security. And so I think things are moving somewhat in that direction. But part of it has to do with the president having advocated for partners and allies to do their fair share too of carrying the burden. So in a lot of countries, it's not very popular to invest a lot of tax money in national defense. They'd rather have it go out into other programs. But if the United States is going to be meaningfully engaged, spending a great deal of money investing in a tremendous global force, and if you want it to partner, then you need to be investing more in your own capabilities. It's like the old adage of the Lord helps those who help themselves. And so Taiwan has a role to play in that. Others in Asia have a role to play in that. But I think things are largely moving in the right direction in terms of thinking across the region. And if there's any doubt, the Chinese, the way they're behaving right now, is just pushing the rest of the region to think more about these actions in this regard. So I think that's positive.
Okay, next question.
I have
Yes.
statement to make. So it's in the back.
Oh.
Okay, so I get Kathy just mentioned that Fapa could do more, like involved in the business and other areas. But I want to mention is actually Fapa's concentrate on Congress, but we have what we call NATWA, that is North America Taiwanese Women Association, which we did all the community work. So we do give scholarship to the communities. We ask them to write articles about Taiwan. So annually, we do that every year. So other than that, we have Team Taiwan in a Taiwanese women group. We also have like domestic violence. We help the community. So we do Fapa and NATWA, we do different work. One is concentrated in the Congress. The other one is community work, which is Taiwanese women. So I want to say I'm proud of Taiwanese working so hard, regardless of how difficult it is for us.
I wouldn't dare modify or add that.
Okay, next question. What is the U.S. version of the One China policy?
I have to say I hate this question. It's not just that. It's one of the most frustrating things in my life is listening to people manipulate me in the English language. Because One China makes no sense in English. There are almost no Americans who give a crap how many Chinas there are. And so whether it's 2 Chinas, 12 Chinas, 1 China, no one cares. What matters to us is what kind of China, what kind of nation China is, how it's treating its people and other people. And so I really do hate the topic, because I think that some very, very weak people in America have allowed the Chinese Communist Party to manipulate us using our own language. And I think it's shame on any elected official who speaks these words, one China, because no American voted for a one China policy. Because I would wager to say no American can explain what it is. And I'm not just making that up. I served in the Bush administration when a very talented and experienced Assistant Secretary of State named Jim Kelly went before Congress. And someone asked a question about, that we hear about the one China policy and we hear about the one China principle, and can you please explain to us what this means? And this was a member of Congress who didn't like the use of one China. He was trying to push Assistant Secretary Kelly, and he succeeded in pushing Assistant Secretary Kelly, and Assistant Secretary Kelly's response was, well, I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you what it's not. What in the world is that? It's like a sick person is presented to you, and you're a doctor. I can't tell you what you have, but I can tell you what you don't have. Maybe that helps you, but it's not a cure, and it's not a diagnosis. So so what people generally need is we have our one China policy, and it means whatever our foreign service says it means. It means whatever a president says it means. I don't like that. I think we should have an American China policy, and an American Taiwan policy, and an American Japan policy, whatever else. We don't need to have some number policy. But it really fundamentally offends me because it is a very active, effective influence operation. Because if you can control the words people use, you control the thoughts they entertain, which will control the actions they consider, which controls the outcomes. It's all about control. And I think that as free people, we should resist that control. Thank you.
Next question. What is the best way to communicate with pro-Taiwan congressmen and senators?
Well, I think the first thing you should do is take out your checkbook and make a $1,000 contribution to Fapa so that we can hire more people in the Fapa headquarters office to talk to more people in Congress. It's got to be $1,000, no less. Not NT. But the other thing, in reality, it's different in California, and so I would acknowledge that when you're in a very large geographic state and a very large population state, and you have two senators, those senators probably are not very accessible. In a state like Idaho, you have two senators, lower population, big geography, but a lot of times it's quite easy in some American states to just go to an event and run into an elected official and be able to talk about something that matters to you. When it comes to members of the House, those are all districts done by population. Those members should be more accessible than the senators are in general. How do you communicate with them? By communicating with them. It isn't really that much more complicated. Kelsey could explain to you what it's like working in a congressional office where there's communications that come in every day. There's people whose job it is to receive those communications, sort them out, channel them to people to respond. They'll know who the kinds of people are that the member needs to deal with directly, and others can communicate on behalf of the member, whether it's more policy, more political, have you. But there's a whole process that members of Congress have for receiving constituent or advocate communications and how they want to respond or engage. But the simple answer is, how do you do it? Is by doing it. You can do it by going to DC and participating in door knocks. I find, though, that the minds are more open when they're back in their home districts and in their home states. And also, if there's more of you. Because, look, you can fault politicians all you want, but they're always having to work every day and hustling for how do I get those numbers. And if you're a very important and persuasive person, but there's one of you, that will matter. They'll respect you. But if there's 100 of you, I think I'll stop and listen to what these people have to say. So get some numbers. Join an event that they have. They have fundraisers. They all love the people who come to their fundraisers. If it's not a fundraiser, public events where they go to give a speech to a city council. Sometimes the senators give report to state capitals or other locations around the state. Go to the meetings, but come with a group. Even better, come with a group that's not just Taiwanese. Bring some friends to impress upon them that this is a broad-based group with a broad-based priority that they really want heard and acted on. And that's how I would do it. The ones that are already pro-Taiwan, maybe you don't need to spend that much time. They're already converted. But send them thank yous. Give positive reinforcement to the people who are doing the things that we hope for and that we respect. Don't take it for granted. Some of them may be taking risks in constituencies that don't naturally think that this is their state's priority. I have one senator in mind that I want you to think about, regardless of what your party affiliation is. Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado has been the chairman of the Asia Subcommittee on Senate Foreign Relations. He's also been extraordinarily active on Taiwan. Colorado has a reasonably good relationship with Taiwan, but Taiwan is not a household name in Colorado. And all of the risks he has taken by being very high profile in Taiwan, he needs his voters in Colorado to see that this was good. This was worth it. It's good for Colorado, but he needs positive reinforcement. So if you have extra time, I hope that if you know anyone in Colorado, communicate with them to say what a hero they have of yours that is currently representing them, and that this person is up for re-election, and we need exactly this kind of person in Congress if we're going to pass pro-Taiwan legislation. And we need someone like this to speak up and communicate eloquently, and he's a very positive guy. So when he's working and talking, he can attract other people and bring more people to the cause. But that's, so if he's pro-Taiwan already, we need to support him, we need to thank him. If you know people that can help him get reelected, you need to encourage them. But that's just a case study of what we need to be doing with the other members who've done good things for us on these issues. It's simple personal relations, what Kelsey was talking about. It really comes down to what are we doing to manage the quality of that personal relationship, and if we manage it well, I think we have high confidence they'll do the right thing.
Okay, next question. The core of all problems in the world still is communism. Can President Trump try to choke it off to death? I think I know who asked this one.
Well, communism has been around for a long time, and I think it is one of the most evil concepts ever created. Certainly, the amount of suffering that has come about as a result of communism is almost unfathomable. Lives lost, careers destroyed, families broken, economies destroyed. It's terrible. The Communist Party of China has destroyed all of the traditional institutions of a great civilization. When I started studying Chinese, one of the things that was most complicated for me to try to learn was all of the names that you would have for an uncle or an aunt or a cousin. Because I just have aunt, uncle, and cousin. But even though I come from a very, very large family, and it's complicated, it's aunt, uncle, and cousin. But in Chinese, you have cousin on mother's side or father's side, different word. Is that cousin older or younger? Different word. Uncle, mama, papa, older, younger. It's like a big Venn diagram all over the place with different words. I could not handle that. But you know what? The communists took care of that. Because after 2 generations of a one-child policy, Chinese kids don't have cousins. They don't just not have a word for is the cousin on mom's side or dad's side, is the cousin older or younger. They don't have cousins. Let that sink in. A civilization and a culture that had such weight attached to the importance of family relations that it created elaborate words to describe this map of where people were. And in 2 generations under the Communist Party, thousands of years of that destroyed. It's bad. Can President Trump change it? I'm sure he has just a massive tweet ready to go out like a lightning bolt, and it will be gone. No, it's going to be something that the people of this world have to organize and rise up and resist. I'm amazed, in awe of the people of Hong Kong, somewhat late, I would say, but stepping up and taking real risk to say that they care about their fundamental freedoms. They care about rule of law, and they know that they're taking risks, and they're showing up in numbers. When will the people of China do that? And the Communist Party every day works to make sure that they can't or won't think of it. We need to find a way to help them. It's not our policy or strategy necessarily, but we should help those who are willing to take the risks and do things for themselves. If the problem is communications are totally controlled by the Chinese government, right here within a dozen or so miles of where we are, there's got to be enough engineering brain power to break the Great Firewall of China. We've got to do that. I think the future of humanity rests on our being able to do things like that. So we need to take it seriously, and it's going to take large numbers of the people of China to be willing to take risks to eliminate this kind of an idea. It's not going to be a presidential tweet as entertaining as I would find that to be.
Can you push President Trump to recognize Taiwan as a formal country within the U.S. in his second term?
That's an interesting question, because there's some pieces to that question. Can I push President Trump? He has Secret Service protection. I would not advise him pushing the United States. Second, it assumes a second term, something I don't oppose, but I would wager to say that's a minority view in the Bay Area. But when it comes to Taiwan policy, he has created the greatest time of opportunity in advocating Taiwan policy in my entire career. He is the first president to challenge the fundamental assumptions that are flawed and manipulative in the One China policy. Without actually challenging the One China policy, he's challenged a lot of the elements of that policy for over the last 40 to 50 years. And so I actually hope there is a second term to be able to keep doing those kinds of things, but that was in the question. I wasn't pushing that. The questioner pushed that. But can we get Taiwan official diplomatic recognition? Most of my life, people have said, that's crazy. We can't do that. That'll mean war. Well, you know what? My experience has told me that we don't always get to choose when someone declares war. I don't want to be flippant about the risk of conflict. And I don't, so I obviously, if I'm a supporter of Fapa that has, from its inception, supported independence and self-determination for the people of Taiwan, which I do, make no bones about that. And I think the United States was weak-minded. It should have recognized the independence of Taiwan long ago. There was a time when the US government was prepared to recognize the separate sovereignty of Taiwan. It might have been called the Republic of China at the time, but a really stupid dictator named Chiang Kai-shek said no. But that's the way the world was then. And then habits were created and time passed. So I think that it is more likely in the not too distant future that we might get to a point where we can have America recognizing Taiwan. But we've got some very difficult challenges to deal with between now and when I think that day arrives. We've got the economic issues that are going on between Taiwan and China and the US and China. I don't know what's going on with the leadership of China. Maybe you do, you know more than I do. But I strongly suspect that internally, they're more scared than we think they are. Their behavior is not consistent with a confident government. They have to lie about their economic figures. They have to bully people on the outside to try to rally the people on the inside. They have to break up churches They have to break up social movements and organizations in order to try to keep people separate so they can't organize against them. These are not things that a confident political leader or a government does. These are actions out of weakness. Having to push so hard right now on Hong Kong, having to push so hard right now on Xinjiang, having to push so hard right now in some ways on Taiwan stuff. All of this is consistent with a government that is actually more at risk. And if you look at how that government spends its money on security, there's this funny little group in China called Gong'anju, Public Security Bureau. Which do you think receives more money? The Public Security Bureau, the Gong'anju, or the People's Liberation Army, the Jiefangjun? Gong'anju has a larger budget. The government of China, by way of its security budget, is more scared of its own people than it is of an invasion from an outside power. Is there any place else in history where you've seen a country of any size that has any of these attributes? So in that context, something is happening in China. I can't tell at what pace it's going. I can't tell how it's going to manifest itself in coming years. But for the first time, the rest of the world has begun to see the true nature of the Communist Party. For the first time, the world has seen a leader of the United States that is willing to challenge some of the economic unfair practices that China has gotten away with for a very long time. This may be a small step, but it's a fundamental step in a different direction. And just because I'm a Republican and I support what the president is trying to do, there's a lot of Democrats who agree with this policy. You know why? Because it was the policy of the Democratic Party 20 years ago. And so this is not a Republican versus Democrat, Trump versus anti-Trump question. This is really sort of a come to your senses pro-America, anti-CCP issue. And so if we stay on that trajectory, I think the day of being able to recognize the legitimate leadership of the democratic government of Taiwan is closer. But let's not push right now on that, partly because that's not a decision for some white guy talking to Taiwanese Americans around the United States to make. That's a decision for the people of Taiwan to make, voters in Taiwan to make. And so my job, our job in working in America and other parts of the world is to try to make the world safe for them to be able to make that decision. So we need to have more people supportive and encouraging, more people that will stand with them to resist the inevitable sort of dragon fire blowing at them should they speak their will. That's the work that we have to do. But because of what I talked about, I honestly believe that the day might be sooner than later.
And I segue to the next question. What are the current positions of Taiwan for both the Democratic and Republican Party? And part two is, will the U.S. ever use Taiwan as a pawn for trade negotiations with China?
Well, the second one is yes. Taiwan has been used as a bargaining chip, a pawn, whatever else. Been used. Get used to it. I'm only saying that partially in a joke. All of us have been bargaining chips. We're bargaining chips in every budget discussion that goes on in the U.S. Congress. Countries and peoples are bargaining chips when you bring things to the table where there's going to be pros, cons, things like that. Taiwan and the people of Taiwan, we can be happy about it or we can be sad about it, but for more than 100 years, the people of Taiwan have not been consulted a single time about who their government is that will be recognized by the rest of the world. When the Qing dynasty decided to give it up under the Treaty of Shimonoseki, were the people of Taiwan consulted? I'd say no. The end of World War II, when Japan withdrew, were the people of Taiwan consulted? Say no. 1979, when the United States derecognized, people of Taiwan consulted? No. You know, the guy that's famous for this terrible one China policy, Henry Kissinger, you know how many times he's visited Taiwan? I mean, he's 10,000 years old. And you know how many times he's bothered to visit Taiwan? 0. So the people of Taiwan haven't been consulted. So in that kind of a context, is there really any other answer than if there's going to be negotiations that there's a chance that Taiwan might be a bargaining chip? My view is let's make Taiwan the best bargaining chip, not because it means it'll be sold out, but because it's leverage. Let Taiwan set high standards on trade policy so that everyone in Asia, but especially China, has to get peer pressure about raising to higher standards. Let Taiwan set a standard of investing in its own self-defense so that others in Asia are shamed into having to pay more to try to deter China. Have more of its own independent capability to do these things, at least make it hard for China to focus all of its threats on one little spot. And they have to work against many, many others. So I think in a way, I might sound offensive in saying, yeah, of course, going to be a bargaining chip or going to be a part of the negotiations. It's not necessarily a bad thing. When Taiwan was a bargaining chip in the 1950s with the missile crises that went on at that time, that led to decades of American support for Taiwan. So I see that there's some opportunity when Americans are paying attention, when Americans see enough value that you're a chip. Because you know when you're not a chip, you're nothing. You want to be more than nothing. You want to be on the mind. You want to have some value. So, I mean, honestly, I hear this question at almost every venue. I'm not angry or upset about it, but I really earnestly hope that we could all think from a different angle about this is not necessarily putting Taiwan at great risk. This is an opportunity for Taiwan to be relevant, to be a part of the conversation, to increase value, and maybe even add pressure. Because you know what? On the other side of it, I have zero confidence that China can engage in an agreement it will keep. So, that means no one's going to be executing any agreement. Right now, before our very eyes, they are violating an international agreement, the Sino-British Joint Declaration, that promised that Hong Kong people would govern Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy. That is a lie. If they're violating an international treaty with Britain right now, why do we think that there will be some other agreement that they're going to honor, and in part of that agreement, we're going to sell out Taiwan? So I understand the anxiety. I don't want that outcome to happen of Taiwan being sold out. Taiwan already was sold out by the Nixon and Carter administrations, and that sellout has been reinforced by subsequent American administrations. We need to rescue from the sellout. But I'm actually optimistic that in the course of these conversations, Taiwan is now more relevant. And I think together we can put more pressure on China, hopefully, where they would have to change before anything was delivered on other negotiations that had to do with pulling back from Taiwan. But the other thing is, we have almost the entire US Congress that has been awakened on this. And it's our job as Fapa members to keep them awakened and engaged on it, so that there'll be 535 potential presidents that wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, wow, this is a beautiful, powerful future president looking back at me. And that they can stand up and say, well, wait a minute. America has to stand by the free people of Taiwan. We can't have a deal that pulls back on respect for human rights, self-government, a major trade partner, important part of our supply chain, all of that. So I think it's an important set of issues, but I hope that we can think about it from a slightly different point of view.
The amount and the magnitude of actions against China made by the Trump administration is quite unusual. However, President Trump himself is also quite unusual. Do you think these recent actions against China are specifically a Trump thing, or is it a cause that's shared amongst more of the US politicians, leaders of today?
Well, I'm one of those that believes that the general American view of China has shifted a great deal in recent years. And there's no question in my mind that Donald Trump as an individual has consistently talked about some of the ideas that he is executing now, especially on the economic issues. And all you have to do is Google Donald Trump, I think 1980, going on to a talk show. He later went on to Oprah at some point and was talking about things. I mean, he was talking about Japan, which is kind of funny when you look back on the anxieties that Americans had about Japan in the 70s and 80s. But also talking about China being an unfair trade partner throughout the 1980s. Like I said when I was talking about Democrats having some difficulty trying to oppose what he's doing on China, in part because it used to be their policy, in the 1980s and 90s, there were a lot of issue advocacy organizations on China trade when most favored nation status was being debated in the 1990s in Congress. There were a lot of Democrat and labor groups that were against most favored nation status. And you know who was one of the people that was echoing what they were saying and that they were collaborating with back in the 1990s? It's Donald Trump. And so it's hard for people to remember that there was a world before the 2016 election cycle. And there's a thing called YouTube where you can actually go back and see some videos of people saying things. But, excuse me, as an individual, Trump has talked about these for a long time. But I would also say this isn't just about him or what he's advocated. He's also ridden a wave, recognizing that popular opinion had moved. Popular opinion has moved in both major parties. And whether you're engaged as a Republican or a Democrat or something else, be engaged. But there was also part of a question was talking about Republicans and Democrats' policies. Parties have platforms. Parties have resolutions. Be engaged through your party. Encourage them at the local level, the state level, and the national level to pass resolutions, to draft things into their platforms that say that it's the principled position of members of your political party to support the freedom, democracy, and self-determination of the good people in Taiwan. And that as Americans, we'll stand by whatever needs they have to provide for their self-defense, whatever your preferred language is. But work through the political party process to get broader representation across the parties to commit to this. I did this in part of the National Convention in Cleveland for the Republican Party. I was on the platform committee in Cleveland. I actually had the honor to co-chair the subcommittee on national security where all of the international related language came up for the platform. We were able to put in language that was very, very critical of China and the Communist Party, but also very supportive of Taiwan, and we added the 6 assurances into the Republican Party platform. The Democratic platform doesn't have stuff like that in it, but it could if people would organize and push it through those channels. Let there be competition among the parties to say who's gonna do the better job of standing by the freedom, security, and self-determination of the people of Taiwan. Let them compete. But we can do more in that regard. So I think there's lots of opportunity in that, but this isn't really about the president as a person or the specific moment in time. There's been a gradual shift. The president recognized it. I think leaders of both political parties are recognizing it. Leaders of other countries are recognizing it now too. So now the real question is, what do we do with this opportunity to make fundamental change? And we know that one China policy is one of those we'd like a fundamental change on. The economic unfairness in the relationships is a fundamental change. One other more technical issue that's relevant to Taiwan too, as it is to America, is the security of supply chains. And I think there's a lot the U.S. and Taiwan can do to collaborate on trying to monitor and protect the security of supply chains. And in so doing, maybe onshore more manufacturing that went to China to bring it back to Taiwan, back to the U.S., to other areas, so that we have more secure, reliable supply chains. These are the opportunities that are created by what's happening now.
Okay, this is a question for both Steve and Kelsey. Fapa has been doing many good things for Taiwan, but why has the Tsai administration seemed to have very little recognition for Fapa's accomplishments publicly? Should Fapa headquarters do more marketing for Tsai's government?
I fail to see how that's a question for me or Kelsey. Because, you know what? Neither Kelsey nor I vote in Taiwan. And we're not members of the DPP. I know I'm a Republican. I'm pretty sure she is, although I don't really know how to investigate. I'm pretty sure she is too. And I honestly, while all of you have invested a lot of your life in Fapa, and I encourage you to invest more so that we can sustain the effort, Fapa is an American organization.
Yeah.
Our first mission shouldn't be about a leader of Taiwan succeeding or failing. It should be back to that stuff that I was talking about Lee Dong-Hui's vision. What are we doing to help other people understand, be proud of who they are, know who they are, be proud of who they are, and be able to have their children be the masters of their own destiny. We can do that as Americans. Whether members of Fapa feel like Fapa is used as a public relations arm for a party or a candidate, not my issue. Maybe people won't like the fact that I don't consider it to be my issue. I want Fapa to be spending all of its time, money, and effort getting more Americans to know about Taiwan and to support a pro-American Taiwan policy. That's what I want.
Can I just make a very, very quick remark after hearing your comment?
Yeah.
That's the question I was raised. Because of that, like for instance, this time when President Chai visited New York, she could have said something, okay, I appreciate all the politicians and what's the name, due to the fact that our Taiwanese American Fapa Foundation did a tremendous job, so that I had the opportunity to come here, which I couldn't have before. Then I appreciate you all of them. I'm hoping Fapa can do more things, and one day soon I could visit Washington D.C. Something like that. I hope President Chai should have that political sense, but she didn't do anything. That's why I'm really concerned about it.
I appreciate your feeling about the exchange that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I have no way to explain or control what President Tsai says or doesn't say.
Sure.
I can say, and I'm not a spokesman, or it's not my job to defend her, but I can say, as a washed up politician myself, that sometimes you go to an event and you have all this preparation, you might have had the best advice from the best people, and you get up and you talk, and you forget to say something that mattered. Sometimes you forget to thank the most important person in the room. And so it could be that it's not that she had bad feelings, it's not that she had, that it was intended. It could just be, if you were at the event in New York or the event in Denver, it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And all this stuff is going on. And these elected leaders are still human, and they might get excited, they might be tired, they might get forgetful. I know I get more forgetful as time goes by.
Well, in my opinion, I had to say she's a little bit selfish. She thought all this thing done by herself, by her administration, which is not right, which by many, many Taiwanese Americans, like a Fapa. Otherwise, she would have not stayed in Denver, So that kind of thing, I think Fapa headquarters should have done a little more.
Please do not interrupt the question.
Okay.
I think we understand what your feeling was.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes.
I actually don't agree because I feel we do everything for Taiwan, but doesn't matter being appreciated or not. I think I stand on my principles. That's how I feel.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Could Stephen, Kelsey, please talk about the phone call between Tsai and Trump?
Kelsey, would you like to explain the phone call?
Not my question.
Yeah. I get this question sometimes. And one of the reasons why most people in Taiwan don't know who Steve Yates is, but know who Ye Wang-Hui is. When the news coverage of that phone call completely took over Taiwan coverage, all of the names that was used in the media with Ye Wang-Hui, so no one knows who Steve Yates is. The phone call, let me put it this way. I'm embarrassed that it took multiple election cycles for a president-elect in the United States to accept a courtesy phone call. I mean, no nation in the history of mankind established normal diplomatic relations or declared independence by way of offering a congratulatory phone call in an election. So there's never been any reasonable rule against a president of Taiwan calling a president-elect in the United States. It just has the request has never been honored before 2016. Of all of the questions, and I'm a partisan, so all the questions that have been asked about the Clinton campaign, and not necessarily answered completely. Has anyone gotten a complete answer about whether Hillary Clinton was prepared to receive a congratulatory phone call if she would have won, as all of America seemingly believed she was going to? My guess, and it's not entirely a guess, my guess is that there was a request for a congratulatory phone call to Hillary Clinton. And then when the results were different, the request for a congratulatory phone call went to Donald Trump. But has anyone asked Hillary Clinton or her advisors, would they have accepted the phone call from the first female elected president of Taiwan? And again, forgive me, I'm a partisan. I would wager to say the answer is no, they were going to decline that. But we haven't had any real coverage of my fun little hypothetical counter-historical example. But for the Trump campaign, I think it's been alluded to earlier, it was different in every way, shape, or form. And so when the results came in, all of a sudden there was a long queue that started of different leaders from different places that wanted to call to congratulate the president-elect. The staff, being staff, not a very big staff, started gathering those names and the details and started asking the president-elect. The president-elect at the time was basically a private citizen, not a politician, not used to being staffed for this kind of stuff before. Some of these people had his private office number, and he was still answering his private office phone. And so some of these phone calls squeaked through right away, just because the man himself picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Donald Trump here." And you had some congratulatory phone calls that went through. Taiwan was on the list, and it was approved to move forward with receiving the call fairly soon. But the team needed to have some kind of a process for it. And so there was a pause of time between when the election night had occurred and some initial calls had happened, and then they sort of reset the process to happen a couple weeks later. But then the call goes through. During that time, there's immense efforts by pro-Chinese people, the Chinese government itself, to try to turn it off. And there were lots of warnings of, you can't do this or else, and all, that so many bad things will happen. Basically, the world would end. But President Trump proceeded. President Tsai called him. It wasn't a terribly long call, but it was cordial, fine. The first time anything like that had ever happened. Did it change U.S. policy in any fundamental way? I can't point to a single element of policy that was changed by that phone call. But it was a change of tone, it was a change of direction, it was a change of attitude, it was a clear message that Beijing is not going to tell the president-elect or the president who he can or should take a phone call from. If you have an idea about that, feel free to put it in the suggestion box. But he's going to do what he chooses to do. And I thought that was a really, really important message to send. So as much as that phone call was aimed in some ways to a Taiwan audience to say you're not alone, and that there'll at least be some degree of dignity that elected US leaders are going to give to the leader of Taiwan, it was also a very sizable message aimed more at China. And I think that part of it has been left out of a lot of the analysis and commentary of the phone call. Because every news report in Taiwan is like going down a 100-mile well and then looking back up at a pinhole of light. And everything is all about that pinhole of light that is Taiwan. And no one can see the surrounding area anymore, that the president was actually resetting the terms of how he was going to allow the Chinese government to try to deal with him. So I'm glad the phone call went through. He had some interesting tweets after that, 3 of them. I encourage you to go back and find those tweets because they're actually very impressive. I talk too long, use too many words. This is 3 tweets of 140 characters or less that said some pretty important things about the direction of U.S.-China policy, U.S.-Taiwan policy, and those tweets kind of hold up the test of time.
wouldn't be all bad for us to be cheeky activists of Fapa and ask some other members of Congress, where are your tweets along these lines? Can you write 3 great things like this and maybe start repeating them, what have you? But it was an interesting time, and I don't know that there'll be another phone call. I think it would be super cool if President Tsai happened to get reelected next January, that President Trump gave her a congratulatory phone call, just to return the favor. After that goes out in the internet, I'm sure I get hate mail from people that say I endorsed President Tsai, and I've hurt the feeling of 1.3 billion people.
This next one reads a little bit like a love letter almost. I mean, there's a phone number on it too, which is kind of neat.
Is she cute?
So the full statement is, I look forward to Taiwan becoming a U.S. state in the future. It can always block China's thinking in the Asia-Pacific hegemony. After the Second World War, the U.S. defeated Japan, so the U.S. is the most qualified to take Taiwan. And Taiwan people are the most intelligent. 1980s, we started the computers, which helped the U.S. become so strong. The Taiwan people can enjoy permanent freedom and democracy too. That was the end of the question. But I think turning it into a question is there even the likelihood of becoming a state?
Well, I've actually heard topics along these lines for more than 20 years. And there are other parts of the world that have entertained the idea of becoming a U.S. state too. So, I mean, there's the Taiwan part of it, and there's several sort of data points in the statement in the form of a question or a question in the form of a statement that I agree with in terms of the people of Taiwan can enjoy freedom and all that. We should have an American commitment. Do you remember when the last state was added to this union? Yeah. Someone can ask Google what year Hawaii became a state, and when that answer comes forward, it is going to be more than a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
More than a few Congresses ago. More
1959.
1959. So, my math is a little rusty, but that's a nice round number. 1959 to 2019, not a single state added. And what's the main consequence of a state being added to the Union? When you think about the U.S. Constitution, I'm sure every one of you has read the U.S. Constitution thoroughly and basically give thanks for that document. And I mean that, I do. But what's the main consequence of a state being added to the Union, just in terms of what's a change that everyone else would feel or notice? Besides adding a star to the flag, and it would be out of balance then. But if we add a state, that adds 2 senators to the United States Senate. Once you begin doing that, you are no longer talking strategy and what's good. You're talking bare knuckles politics. And so whether it's DC pursuing statehood or any other entity looking at some kind of treatment of statehood, you start getting into an argument among those who want to hold a majority in the U.S. Senate, saying, if I allow one for the first time in 70 years, what about Puerto Rico? What about D.C.? What about others? Maybe we should have a coalition come in. And it ends up being a runaway conversation. And this conversation has happened over and over, not about Taiwan in D.C. circles, but about Taiwan being a 51st state. I've seen banners and demonstrations about this. And I've heard some of the legal arguments too. I'm not a lawyer. I think I can read, but politically, this is not something that I think has an audience of the size that's going to create the result that the advocates see. So, it's easy when someone gives a question to just say, yeah, I know it, I agree, and this is great, it should happen. Analytically, stepping back, I just don't see this as having a path forward unless something truly profound were to change. The other thing that is just in terms of the current mood of the United States, in a time when Americans overwhelmingly imposed on both major parties a desire to pull back from long-term commitments to faraway places. You're going to have a hard time saying that an island that is 100 miles away from China and 1,000 miles away from the United States, more than that, is going to be an easy sell for statehood. What about it being a territory? Well, there's a whole bunch of bells and whistles that go along with that too. Ultimately, it's also not going to be the case. This is going to be something pushed from the U.S. outward. This would have to be something that was a generic or an internal movement inside Taiwan. And from my imperfect observation of public opinion in Taiwan, it seems to me that the notion of kind of natural independence is one of the dominant views that has been growing among younger generations, but also the broader public. And that, I think, has a much more viable path forward than becoming a formal part of another country.
Okay, so we've reached the end of our written responses. Here's the last one. I have to assume this has to be a doctor. Is this one? I honestly, it's a doctorate, I think. But I can't really.
Twitter rules 100.
Yes, if you could please ask. And we actually still have another 30 minutes. So once this is complete, okay.
So actually, I heard quite a few things. So originally I asked 3 questions, and I asked the first question most important. And I think Cassie and you mentioned about the engagement and community support to do something. And I think that's important for citizens as we are what we can do. And I think I heard when people mentioned about the upcoming Taiwan election is probably the most important one. If some reason something happened, that could be the last one. So as personally, what we think it is, how can we help? Come back to say, how can we help Taiwan? And I think as a citizen, like we don't really get involved that much. We don't know what channel, what the help we can get it, how we can participate, we can get involved, even though most of you suggest the way to involve. So specific question is what is upcoming election? If we want to go help, for example, we're going to help to put the election or back in the eve of election, what can we really help? And are there any tool, any channel, any organization, any web organization can help provide us to help, or we can get involved to help? Thank you.
It's a very fair question, but in a sense, I think I need to clarify, neither Kelsey nor I talked about how to affect elections in Taiwan.
No, not particular. I mean, talk about
Right.
the community.
So we're talking about engaging a community, getting active in politics, trying to push things within the party of your choice, influencing elected officials. All of our comments are talking about how to do that within the United States. And partly because Kelsey may know every elected official in Taiwan, but I don't. There's still going to be things that have to do with methodology that would be similar. But you know what? Taiwan has a very developed election infrastructure. There are lots of people who work on data. There's lots of people who work on communications. There's lots of people who work on line chats, Facebook feeds, a whole host of different channels of information. There'll be activities to go to. My favorite part of observing Taiwan election cycles is the rallies. I really wish they would go back to having some competition on creative approaches to these. And again, I don't want to dismiss or sound critical, but the little piggies that President Tsai had, I'm sure that you guys loved them. I sort of liked it when there was all the stuff that was going on around Chen Shui-bian's election. We had a Bian Mao and all this other kinds of, there's like merchandise that was out there that made it so that politics were fun, and the mass marketing was a way to get more people to pay attention and notice stuff. I mean, someone's walking around or riding on public transportation, and they're wearing a creatively designed fun hat or jacket or whatever else. I mean, in American politics, I'd say, the part of it's resources too, but we're dead boring. We're not out there putting on kind of flashy vests and noisemakers and having rallies with great food and all kinds. There's a Trump rally. You can go to that. It'll be a little bit of that. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's getting closer. But a real proper Taiwan political rally is like the Barnum and Bailey circus meeting a national convention, and that is fun. That's exciting. That's a lot of people. And going back and observing that and participating in that should be something that's really exciting, especially if you have the right to vote going back there. But how to plug into that, all of you are going to have to know 10 million times better than I do about how best to plug into that. But I'm sure that if you're a member or a supporter of the Democratic Progressive Party, they're going to have an infrastructure that will recommend places where they need help. When candidates and campaigns are getting down to crunch time, if they've got a professional operation, they will know these are the potential areas where we might pick something up. These are the areas where we might potentially lose, and these are the safe areas. These are the areas that are lost, and so they might be able to direct. Well, we need more volunteers to go to one geography in Taiwan versus others, and so there might be a way to spend scarce time and resources to be helpful to the cause you believe in when that time comes. But really, I hope that people are engaged here in the 2020 cycle, from local elections all the way to Congress to the presidency. Challenge the parties, challenge the candidates, make them talk about how to make U.S.-Taiwan relations great again. Whatever floats your boat, let people jump in and pitch ideas. But if you show up with your friends, they'll need to address the topic. You keep showing up, they'll think, holy cow, I better have a policy on this. I need to have an advisor that helps me manage outreach to these very active people. They keep showing up. And so we can do a lot of good by doing those little things. And if you want to do those same things in Taiwan, I trust the method works wherever you go.
Thank you. So we still have about 25 minutes left on the clock, so we will have an open forum towards the end to give Steve a little bit of a breather. We have two announcements, one from Alan.
Yeah, just a quick commercial. After this meeting starting at 4, there will be another talk by the founder of TaiwanUS.net, Taiwan Taiwan.
Who's that guy?
He's going to talk about how to organize how to organize as a grassroots countering the red media in 400-500 videos in talk. Mr. Tai will be the main speaker. Thank you.
Okay, another announcement, Raymond.
Okay. Bill, thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to invite you coming tomorrow here again, 2 to 4, to meet the Professor Cai Dinghui, same time. I just returned from Taiwan last week. The whole last week I'm in Taiwan to attend my nephew's wedding party. Thank you, my brother. We meet a lot of cousins, mother's side and the father's side. When I was in Taiwan, I usually come into the Cai Dinghui the office in Taipei, 火车站, 青岛东路. But this time, Cai Dinghui in Taiwan. So Cai Dinghui still say, oh, okay, you still visit my office. So I meet the office to see the young people. And we talk about Cai Dinghui is frustrated how Taiwan is so difficult and so many new party coming. Then we will talk about tomorrow. But the young people talk about, I asked them what you are doing. They said, I'm prepared in case Hangul win the election. Okay, we think that's terrible, that's crazy, but something might happen. In case really happens, do you prepare? I don't know. Those young people thinking they are prepared. They have the 青年会议, so they are prepared. So if you are interested to learn more, come in here. During the short visit, I have happened to have opportunity to meet the 北社募款参会. I meet the 喜乐岛成立, and I also meet my classmate, roommate in He's retired professor from
Kaohsiung University. He said he supposed what happened. But our young people said he is prepared because something might be happen in case it will happen. So I encourage you come in here to listen to the old guy Chinese Gui and.
Okay. So we have one more written, and then we'll have a open floor Q&A. So Steve, in New York City, there's a tower called Trump Tower. Do you know in Taipei there's a residential building about 30 stories? East. It's called the Neo Trump. Completed in 2005. People don't know. Actually, you can read.
Okay, let me read.
Yes.
Steve, we all know there's a tower in New York called Trump Tower. Do you know there's a tower in Taipei called Neo Trump, built in 2005?
The answer is
called
no.
New Trump. Only 200 feet from 101. I'm only the only one, you see the only unit on 18th floor. So next time you go there, if you see President Trump, you can tell him, make him happy.
Tell him he has a room waiting in the Neo Trump.
Wow. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. Open Q&A, please, questions. If you have a speech that you would like to do, let me know. We can arrange it for your own talk event in the near future. But yes, please, questions for Steve, Kelsey, myself for chapter questions, HQ questions for John. So yes, open Q&A. Ting in the back.
Hi, so I'm Ting, part of Fapa, NorCal. Just a quick question for Steve and also Kelsey. So I think one of the major reasons why we would like the United States to eventually recognize Taiwan is so that other nations would be either led or inspired or say, well, if the Americans can do it, then we can do it too. And to eventually get a majority or even most of the countries in the world to recognize Taiwan. So my question is, if the United States is now being seen as acting unilaterally or sort of retreating from its global leadership, does that make it harder for the scenario that describes it happening?
So I think it's definitely the case that if the United States takes a major action to recognize the government of Taiwan, that there would be reconsideration by a number of other countries around the world. Don't know how many, don't know how fast, but surely there would be some that would see the demonstration. Not in the United States. They're just now, we have the Secretary of State going to Tehran to meet with the Iranians. The acting president, in trying to displace the successor to Hugo Chavez, and we're engaging the world and how the world is engaging us, not whether we're engaging the world or whether the world is engaging us. We've had this extremely vigorous negotiation about trade and economics with the leaders of China, not because the United States isn't engaging in trade or economics, but because we're trying to reset a relationship so that it would continue, but be one that's more healthy. We didn't undo NAFTA and just leave it at that and stop trade with Mexico and Canada. A successor agreement to NAFTA has been renegotiated, and now it's actually there's an effort to try to push it through to get the requisite numbers in Congress to support it. So I think fundamentally, under the current administration or under any administration, we're not withdrawing. And leadership is something that happens so when you take a stand and others take note and in some ways begin to modify their behavior. How else would you describe the president standing up for a different approach to China? There isn't a single more important economic actor in the world outside of the United States than China in terms of the direction that the organization of the global economy is going. And he stood up, the when he began to raise tariffs and try to put pressure on the government of China, other countries started saying, you know what, I think we're going to raise some tariffs too. And I'm not necessarily someone who says, hey, it's awesome, tariffs. But the issue is, I don't know how you would call that anything other than leadership. If, you know, whether you agree with it or not, you can say it's bad leadership, you can say it's good leadership, but it's leadership of someone going forward, taking a different approach, people saying it could never work, and then it's having an effect, and it's being sustained, and they're changing their behavior. That's leadership. It's engagement. It's just a different kind of engagement, a different kind of leadership. And I think that's what's going to go forward if, and I would think it's completely consistent with the character of the priorities that the team around President Trump were advocating through the campaign and through his time in office, for them at some point to recognize Taipei as the government of Taiwan. That would be completely consistent with it. It doesn't mean I have heard from anyone in the administration that, yeah, why don't we do this either right before or right after the re-election campaign. But it's not an alien thought. And it's not an alien thought in the sense, especially, of how much the Communist Party of China has dragged down their net value to the international system. There even not that long ago, there were allegedly educated and reputable people that were writing articles talking about China being the one who was going to lead the global international economic liberal order. Number one, only academics write about orders, because we know the world is not orderly. But the idea that China is going to be leading the market economic liberal world order, a little bit of courage and leadership and fortitude, it would have a demonstration effect that would make others follow. And just in terms of how many countries recognize Taiwan, I would like to believe it would have a good impact on that. But really, the most important thing is not whether these countries sort of register with the United Nations that, hey, we see Taiwan as a country and we want Taiwan to be a member. Really, the most important thing is that this permanent member of the UN Security Council, who outrageously influences human rights commissions and other kinds of things, gets delegitimized, gets embarrassed, is shamed in front of its own people. And when that begins to happen, then the pressure should come off Taiwan, focused and less powerfully aimed at Taiwan. There of us pushing our leaders to define the kind of engagement a little bit better, and hopefully that will have pressure in the right places to make the people of Taiwan more safe in their future.
Another World Democratic Trade Organization.
Well, this is another one of those long-standing trends where history is more of a pendulum than sort of a straight line or even just a curve. And we have these periods where major events happen because of bilateral interaction among countries, and then there's a movement to try to collectivize action and pull it together within organizations and institutions. Obviously, the Second World War was such a traumatic global event that there was a broad consensus among the vast number of countries around the world that they wanted the international system to be more defined by institutions than by the sort of competitive interests of major states. And so that pendulum moved things much more toward aggregating things in it, where the WTO does a great job of policing the law-abiding citizen. It does a terrible job of policing the persistent violator. And so, so the countries that are gonna abide by the rules, it's a fine place to gather and reinforce and negotiate and things like that. But to the rule breakers, the WTO doesn't really do much. And when you have a rule breaker that is arguably the second largest economy in the world, that's a significant outlier in a system. So they're enjoying the benefits of WTO membership without having to abide by full obligations. And we know up until very recently, they have been basically demanding to be treated as a developing nation while they become the second largest economy in the world. I think what's striking to me, I got my graduate degree in the mid-1990s, and that was at the front end of this wave leading up into the WTO. In the last 10 years, we've hardly ever heard people talk about the WTO. WTO has let itself off into irrelevance in some ways. I don't think the United States needs to leave. Whether the president chooses to or not, I don't know. But he's made clear that his priority is going to be on bilateral economic negotiation. And at this time, when you look at the way elections have been going in Europe and Latin America and some other parts of the world, I would not think that the near-term future is one where the WTO plays a large role.
Steve, personally, we like to thank you and for your support, continued contribution to Taiwanese community since so many years ago. I do have a question regards the recognition of Taiwan. It's really frustrated while the whole world recognizes Taiwan as Taiwan, but the government in Taiwan, it doesn't matter DPP or KMT, keep calling themselves Republic of China. So in the future, if really it could happen that, for example, if Taiwan will be elected next year, and as you said, Trump could say get a congratulation call. And would that be happen that under the and so would that be the case that any other country in the world wish to
in Taiwan started gradually changing the Facebook pages and some graphic images that were marketing the various representative offices around the world. Some of you may have noticed when it was talking about TechRow, it wasn't actually listed. And so Foreign Minister Joseph Wu, I think, was doing what I would do if I were in a position of influence, and I'm obviously not very influential because I'm very much against using the Republic of China. It hurt me in my own election campaign in Idaho because people in America, when they hear the word China, they think of China. And it doesn't matter how many words come before the word China, they hear China, and that means China. And people don't like China. And so I wouldn't choose to use a word that makes people angry and mistake who I am. And I've made that very clear and very public, and so it's very obvious that some people are not listening to me on the issue. But I think there's a lot of value in just the leaders of Taiwan just using the word. So, for instance, if you watch a video of President Tsai's speeches while she came through the U.S., I don't know that the words Republic of China were mentioned a single time during any of her events, except by Americans occasionally, oddly enough. If you look at when she was introduced prior to her visit, when she did a video conference in D.C., and she was introduced by Richard Armstrong Tsai, and she said the name Taiwan over and over in her remarks, never once mentioning Republic of China. And so these things, these things happen by people just doing it. I'm not a huge fan of having a constitutional convention to try to give Beijing and its friends a target to shoot at, literally. Just do it. So there's no law or constitutional amendment required to just make the letterhead say Taiwan. There's no law that's required when you're getting interviewed by the media to just say, yeah, joining us today is the president of Taiwan. Just go with that. Just do it. And at least I, for one, have seen President Tsai, Foreign Minister Wu, and some others just use the name Taiwan. And I think that is the single best way that Americans and others in the international community can get used to the word and the name. The other thing is, when Taiwan gets written about in the international media, it's almost never written about as the Republic of China. So, I mean, it might have this silly stuff about renegade province, split whatever, and all of that. But it almost always is Taiwan, not Republic of China. So we have some work to do to clean up what people want to add when they're writing these media articles. So please take Kelsey's advice and find out the email addresses and give very helpful offers to edit, background, whatever, on some of these writings. But people by and large use the word Taiwan. We can give some positive reinforcement for that. But I've seen the leaders of Taiwan use Taiwan, and I think that's the way to go.
We're out of time for today. Some closing remarks from John.
Captain, my captain.
Well, again, I want to thank Steve and Kelsey for traveling all the way out here to speak with us. They're actually doing a tour with our sister chapters in LA and San Diego. So they flew in this morning straight from LA. We picked them up from the airport, filled it, to bring them straight here to have this conversation with us. And then tomorrow, they're flying down to San Diego to see our other chapter down there. So I want to give them another round of applause for all their efforts. So just want to give 3 closing thoughts as one of the last events up in NorCal personally for myself. But one is I want to thank all of you, first and foremost, for taking time out of your busy days or your busy day to come listen to this. One, it always starts with awareness when you think about issues, and the more knowledge you have, the more you can then turn that into action. And I think as we've heard about today for point number 2, these are very interesting times. The pendulum has swung. We've seen a change across Republican to Democratic constituency on their viewpoints around the PRC. But I would encourage everybody not to take this for granted. If you saw that article from Susan B. Thornton and that letter from 100 different China hands or experts, there's very much an argument to swing back exactly to the last 20 years of engagement. And so do not take this time period for granted, which then takes me to point number 3, which is thank you again for all your efforts just for the awareness, and for those of you who have sacrificed and been involved. I encourage you people who day in, day out, full-time jobs are on Capitol Hill talking to congressmen, talking to think tanks, talking to the media to bring awareness about Taiwan's situation and push for all the things that we've talked about today. And so that money is going to actual efforts at not only the grassroots level, but at a national level. Otherwise, other things that you can consider is please renew your membership if you haven't, or consider joining. For an individual, it's $50. For a couple, it's $70. Just think about it this way, $50, that's less than $5 a month. Less than $5 a month. And I've lived in NorCal for 8 years. So I can tell you, if you want to equate it to food, that's like 3 salads in San Francisco. No joke. Maybe two, depending if you add avocado and you want it vegan and gluten-free. So really consider that $50 as a way to not only signify your support, but really try to encourage and continue these efforts. Otherwise, third, get really involved and donate your time. And we have the advocacy conference that Phil mentioned earlier that will be in September from 14th to 16th. I've done this for 15 years now. I'm telling you, this is the time to get out there and have that conversation. And a lot of us from around the nation will get together to really go talk to the congressman on Capitol Hill. The attendance rate has skyrocketed the last several years since the Sunflower Movement. So now we're over 80 to 90 to 100 people at times, and we're turning away applications. And if you become a member, you get the entire weekend for $100. Now, what's the entire weekend? That's at least 2 to 3 nights of hotel with 6 meals. You can all do the math. Most of you here are Taiwanese. You all love a good deal. So think about that. $50 and then an extra 100, and you get basically several nights of hotel and food. Tell me where else you're gonna get that. You're probably not even gonna get that in Taiwan, to be frank. So think about these things. Again, I highly encourage you to either renew your membership, become a member, donate, or at least donate your time. And so thinking about action points, 2 things we like to do to end this session. One, we have a London Wall in the back to support our fellow compatriots on the Hong Kong side who, again, thinking about the infrastructure, having that conversation, they were saying, they're asking us, how does Fapa do this? How are there so many chapters around this nation? How do we even begin? they're starting from also equally oppressed by the PRC. And then finally, as Phil would love to say, we always love to end with some social media and some pictures. So if you guys don't mind, let's do a group picture at the end. Thank you for all coming today.
À, 各位兄弟吼，啊4點到6點吼，由小弟蔡明芳要講台灣大眾媒體甲二控的大選的關係。
Here right after, as you just mentioned, but please do help clean up if you can, just the garbage, recycling, etc.